right, well, welcome to another episode of the Reintroduction Podcast. I'm here with my co-hosts, Mina Suiris and Mina Murham. We're also here with a very special guest, Randa Wassef, all the way from the United Kingdom. You know, we know this is actually a real treat for us. We're on a little bit earlier because it's very late in England right now for Randa. It's about 11 right now?
11:10, yeah.
11, yes, 11:10. Sorry, we're 10 minutes late, guys. But I want to tell you guys a little bit about Randa. Randa, I've known her for probably since 2009. We went to Africa together. And we've known each other. All of us have known Randa through a number of different outlets. She has one of the most beautiful voices. She leads a lot of praise songs for us to come together, and she's just a little bundle of joy. Every time we're with Randa, there's just so much light that illuminates from her, and we are just super honored to have her. Thank you, Randa, so much for staying up late and for blessing the Reintroduction Podcast, episode 11. We're on episode 11.
Wow, thank you so much for inviting me. And yeah, it's good to be here with my family in America. I've come many times to America, I think too many times. So it's kind of nice. It's kind of nice. It's kind of nice that we can at least connect without a plane ticket. And yeah.
Randa's the kind of person that you can meet on like 3 different continents, kind of like in the same week.
Literally.
And if you've heard of Randa's name, you've always heard it in association either with mission, either with Christ, or with worship and praise and worship. So I think she's the perfect person to be with us today on this episode, where we talk about God and worship and God being needy and us being needy for worship and God, and that relationship and dynamic. So it's really great to have her here today with us. And we're excited to let this conversation go forward.
And what better time to talk about worship and prayer than a time like this, where it just feels like the whole world is going under and there's just so much darkness going on. So I think that this is the perfect opportunity for us to sort of encourage one another, and hopefully to encourage some of the listeners that are on this podcast that are hopefully trying to address this specific question of, does God need my worship? Is he needy? Is he lacking something? So Mina Murham, go ahead. Let's lead this discussion. Let's get it going.
Let's do it. So I figured the one thing we can kind of start off with, Randa, maybe you can lead us. When we think about worship, it's just a term that sometimes is used a lot, but means like a million things to a million different people. So just even to set the stage for us fundamentally, when we're talking about this word worship, what do we mean?
Okay, so actually I think for many years we've kind of just associated that the word worship means like I'm singing some songs, I'm praising some hymns, and it's just we've kind of typecasted worship to just be just about that. But if we go back to the original Hebrew words, which when you hear it, it sounds like an Arabic word that isn't very nice, but it's called, I'm going to say it's called shakar. I'm going to pronounce it in that way because it's easier than the Arabic sounding word. And it means to bow down. Like it means like I'm laying it all down in front of a being, a someone, an entity, and I'm prostrating myself for him. I'm just doing everything. I'm laying everything else down for him. This is what worship traditionally means in the biblical context. And obviously throughout the centuries, part of worship means praise. So when I worship someone I love, I'm going to want to be in that person's face, right? I'm going to put them on a bit of a pedestal because I want to be with them, and I'm going to adore them. And that is what worship is in the context for me. When I worship God, I'm adoring him. I'm responding to him, and I will use it by whatever method that would be. Like if anyone has read Practicing Being in the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence, wonderful book. I highly recommend it. It's really thin, and he was like one of the monks in a monastery, and like they kind of relegated him to like being in the kitchen and washing dishes. And he wasn't kind of reaching the levels of the other monks or anything, but he just praised and worshipped God while washing dishes. And that was his worship. And sometimes we just need to strip out all the other stuff and find out, how can I commune with God, and just say that I'm bowing down to him. But yeah.
So actually, on that note, maybe you guys can elaborate on this too. Feel free. You mentioned the other stuff. Right? Part of what we want to also get into in the podcast of, reintroducing what things really are versus what they kind of appear to be. Sometimes, I don't know what it is for you guys, one of the other stuff that I learned kind of growing up is I got this sense that worship is, this like almost like a military experience, right? Like I'm bowing down to the king who is like enslaving me, right? And you better behave, right? I'm wondering if you guys can share a little bit of maybe something that you've either heard as a misconception about some of this other stuff, this worship, from people, or you've heard or you've experienced yourself throughout your life.
Open the floor.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, part of being in a worship, and it's almost like a culture of worship, and you're handed down rituals that kind of are supposed to help guide you into prayer and into proper worship. The problem happens when the rituals trump worship itself. Like when the focus becomes just on the act as opposed to the meaning behind the act. I think Randa did a wonderful summary and kind of going back to the basics of talking about what worship is. And I was kind of thinking about the same thing, is that it's a response. It's supposed to be a response. It is not an initiation. Sometimes when we think of the ritualistic prayer, we think of it as I'm initiating prayer. And I think that in itself is a problem or a misunderstanding of what proper worship really means. Because if I think that I'm initiating, then I'm also thinking that God is demanding worship. And if God is demanding my worship, then I have to just initiate that kind of like act of worship. But the true fundamental understanding of worship is completely that table upside down. It's completely opposite from that.
Yeah, I think the misconception that, just to agree with you both, is that God is lacking something, right? This idea that God created us just because he's missing something, and he needs us to sort of, he needs us to placate something that he's lacking. And I think the reality is the way Randa and Mina described it is, this is an open dialogue and a relationship between two people. God is a real personal God, and he's, even when we are not focused on him, he is constantly present right beside us and within us in every walk through life. So I love the practice of the presence of God, the book that you referenced, because it talks about incorporating God in every aspect of life, whether it be washing dishes or whether it be, gardening, cleaning toilets, etc. It's about keeping that relationship, that person that you really love, close and nearby. But I think the misconception is that God is in need of our worship, or he's lacking something. So and I think a lot of people feel that if they don't worship, or if they don't pray, or if they don't come to God, that God is absent. Even when we're not praying, he's not absent. Even when we're not connecting with him, he's right there and right within. So it's he's the one who initiates and we respond. So I think that's like something that has always been on my mind when I start to feel guilty about like my relationship or my presence, the presence of God has been lacking in my life. That it's not that he's turned his face away from me, it's I have, and he's just there. He's in a room next to me waiting for me to come back and talk to him. So that's just.
And to that point, Chris, you mentioned like this word guilt, right? And we're talking about how worshiping is a response. Rhonda, do you think sometimes the response that we have is maybe a natural, beautiful one of like, okay, we're responding to God's love, so we're going to be worshiping him freely. But sometimes have you kind of seen or experienced that someone is motivated almost by guilt, feeling like if I don't pray, like something bad is going to happen to me, and if I don't do like my do whatever, right? Like I'm supposed to do this for God, I'm supposed to give God this, or give God my time, or give God my worship, give God my whatever. Otherwise, he will not give me the things that I want. He's not going to hold up his end of the bargain.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure many of us have attended many like Sunday schools when we were younger, where we were maybe told if we don't do this, God will be upset. You know, we've heard that, you know, many times, you know, but I mean, sometimes they're a parent, they're trying to show us about like how as a mum or a dad would like discipline their child, like try not do this so you don't do that. But God, like, he doesn't look at us, like, thankfully, in that context. He will discipline us, but he's not gonna be like, I'm angry at me because I'm not, or even if I'm doing things ritualistically, like, even he knows those people, like Saint Paul was ritualistic, right? Before he became Saint Paul, he knew everything about everything, and he did everything to the letter of the law. But still, God met with him and said, okay, well, I'm going to take what you did and what you did before, and I'm going to transform it. I'm going to make it something. So even if people are coming at worship from a ritualistic perspective, if I believe that at the end of that worship, God is present, then God can transform. Doesn't mean they shouldn't do it. Do you know what I mean? Because otherwise some people say, well, I don't want to attend liturgy. I don't want to pray. I don't want to. And that is the challenges that we get, especially when we speak to young people. I don't want to. I don't have the desire. And that's okay, because he puts the desire in us. I mean, I can't fault people who stick to the traditions because they're following what they're told to do. But at some point, God will, I think, break through that and make it real, not just like doing things out of guilt or... yeah, I believe if that person's honestly seeking, then God will change it for them.
Yeah, and sometimes that is sorry, Chris, and sometimes it's kind of like a necessary step, like to in order to breed some real understanding, fundamental understanding. Sometimes it's good to just be kind of handed the beginning of the rope and be like, okay, this is where you get started. As long as there's a process of maturity, and as long as you're being able to see everything holistically. I mean, something in medicine that people always talk about is step back and look at the whole picture. You have to see the whole thing. And the minute you're only focused on what you're seeing in front of you, you miss the entirety of the picture. And I think that's why a lot of us, even just in the 21st century, just the word worship is associated with just negative connotation. It's not something good when you hear the word worship, because it's either associated with like worshiping something, like a habit or something like that. And it's never really talked about in terms of reverence or in terms of that kind of response to a relationship. And one thing that is kind of important to understand is, even in a Christian understanding, when you talk about worship, and if we're going to define worship as a union, if we're going to step back for a second, because worship is always taken, and again, by 21st century standard, is that like, I don't need to worship nobody. Like, this is me, it's my freedom, I owe it to myself. I know I don't need anyone above me. And worship is only reserved to like medieval times where people bowed down to kings. And that's the kind of understanding of worship that we have. But if we're kind of going to step back for a second and we're going to talk about the union, like even like in the Orthodox Church as an understanding, something as the adoration, when we do, like, we don't sit and just look at the body and blood of Christ and be like, oh, it's nice. No, we have to take that and consume it, because it's all about the union with Christ, right? And every time you've looked across history about union in relationships, it's either between like a father and son, husband and wife, like friends. It's intimate relationships. It's never between a king and a slave. That's not a union. You don't see that kind of union. And even Christ himself in John 15, where he says, I no longer call you servants, because servants does not know his master's business. Instead, I've called you friends. So he has come to change the understanding of worship. Instead of like, I'm your master, you're my slave, you're supposed to bow down to me. He's like, I am here with you in union. And that worship is our response to that love. It's not something that God demands for me to get on my knees and be like, please, like, bestow the blessings on me, you know?
Yeah, and obviously I think people can also like misconstrue like why God is so prescriptive about how he wants to be worshipped. Like, he's kind of set a lot of parameters, and he said, I want it to be done this way, don't forget me. Like, I can see where people think he's needy, but when we understand that when I'm worshiping God, I'm coming, as you said, into that union with him. I'm being brought into his presence, and I'm coming with my lack, I'm coming with I have nothing. I'm coming with nothing to offer him, because what can I offer the one who made the star? I can't offer him anything. Like he's not in need. He like I always go back to that chapter in Job. He's like, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Were you there? You weren't there. I know every breadth of this place and the next place, and I know every breadth of who you are. So you don't need to, like, you can't bring me anything. Like even your worship is, I don't need it, but I'm desperate to meet with you. And if this is an opportunity for us to commune together, I'm gonna take it in whatever capacity that looks like, whether it's you singing or jumping off a trampoline, whatever it is, like doing roly-polies. Like I've seen some kids, like, I'm doing to do roly-poly for my dad. Okay, lovely, do it. Like, I'm offering what I have, you know, and he won't reject it. So yeah.
No, go ahead, Chris.
No, Merham, go ahead.
No, please.
I was gonna say, what do you guys? I mean, Merham, maybe you can address this. So, what do you guys think, or what do you say to people when they say, "Man, I am stuck in this sort of. I go to liturgy and I don't get anything out of it, and I have been trying to pray, and I've been praying all the prescriptive methods of prayer, and it just feels like I'm not getting anything out of it. There's no benefit for me, and I just don't want to. I'm just like, I'm over it. Like, I don't want to worship nobody, like Mina Swiris was saying earlier, and I'm just going to do me, and who needs this prayer stuff? I don't feel like I'm getting anything out of it."
I mean, I would just say first, maybe before you guys say, if somebody's telling me they're going to church and going to liturgy, well, hey man, what church we know is open that you're about to do this right now? That's impressive. You know, make sure you wear a mask. You guys are open, UK. Mask.
Hand sanitize.
You know, keep it. I think that's a common experience, though. I think when you talk to people, like there are a lot of faithful people in the church who feel a little bit sometimes frustrated by, you know, their lack of real engagement, you know, with God, going through the motions sometimes, right? And I know we have all kinds of ways and we have all kinds of suggestions. One that's I've sort of discussed with people. I remember a friend of mine called me last week, actually. He was telling me just this exact thing. He was saying, I've been doing all the things, but you know, the first time I just dropped all the things for a moment and I just spoke to God kind of openly was yesterday. I said, oh, that's interesting, you know? And he was sharing with me how it's like human tendency sometimes. Every interaction you have with another person is like give and take. You expect that they have an agenda, they're trying to get something from you, you're trying to get something from them. It's like this dance. The interaction with God is the only one, like Rhonda's saying, like, where there's something weird about it. There's something weird that God has everything and is trying to give you everything. You have nothing. You're only trying to get everything from him. And somehow he's the one chasing you. Doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't know what's in the Eucharist situation, what's in it for Jesus, I don't know. I know what's in it for me, but somehow he makes a big fuss about trying to give it to me, you know, trying to allow me to have, you know, that union. So one thing that sometimes maybe helps is drop your guard down for a second, pause for a moment, and just say, hey, like this is a natural part of what it means to be a human. It's for me to connect with God openly, plainly, and with my defenses down. But sometimes we have so many defenses for so many different reasons that it's hard to say, all right, I'm just going to exhale, pause for a minute, and just connect with him on a natural level.
Mina, I want, since you brought up the point about what is it, what's in it for Christ, and I know what's in it for me. I had thought about just maybe 5 minutes before we started the podcast about this quote from C.S. Lewis, and I looked it up. And it's really cool because it kind of addresses that. And he says, if he, referring to God, if he who in himself can lack nothing chooses to need us, it is because we need to be needed. And I feel like that's really like, it's like God who lacks nothing chooses to need us. That's like, it's unfathomable as an expression, you know, but it speaks of that exact relationship, that there is the give and take is not because of need, or it's because of like love. It's because of creation. It's because of bond. I remember growing up, I mean, I think just as much as every other kid, you're taught that, you know, when you go to heaven, my mom used to always tell me, shout out to Big Mama Sawiris, she used to always say When you go to heaven, there's going to be like a lot of toys and you're going to see all your friends and you're going to have a great time. And I love that. I was like, that's amazing. You have like big castles and toys. And then I went to church and people said, oh, we're going to go to heaven and everyone is going to praise God all day and all night. I was like, that sucks. I'm a kid. I'd rather have my mom.
I like my mom's
heaven. Yeah, I want my mom's heaven, man. Why are you telling me about this? Like, praise
I had to do the sermon.
Right, exactly. But then, like, there is a growth curve, right? You grow up and you understand things a little bit differently. You understand that when we talk about like worship, it's not one way of doing it, because sometimes we think of it very linearly. We think of prayer and worship as like you picking up the book of hours or certain prayers, and just opening it up and reading it word for word, and that's your prayer. But then when you go back to the basics of what prayer really is, when you teach a kid to pray, they understand, okay, just talk to God about your day, open up your heart, and he can respond to you differently. The problem is we see that even in our own prayer lives, is that our prayer has not really matured from when we were like, if you take a kid from like kindergarten, or honestly maybe elementary school, and you take someone from high school and you listen to how they pray, God, heal the sick, feed the poor, thank you for bringing everyone, and whoever didn't come today, have them come next time, and glory be to God forever, amen. And the prayer itself does not mature. It stays kind of the same. And that's the problem, because you are assuming that by following a script, you are doing your job. It's not about a bond. The truth is
like
about
a potion, like a magic focus.
Right.
I had a person pray that at my house one time. I was like, who is supposed to be coming next week? I'm confused about the prayer.
And the thing is that when they prayed it, those kids never came. I was like, I don't know whether that prayer is falling on deaf ears. I'm not sure.
So I guess, Randa, so why do we worship? Like, what's the
purpose?
What's the benefit?
I think
what's the benefit?
Mina Merham and Mina Swear said some nice things, but why do you worship? Why do you lead people to worship when you bring people together to sing songs and to praise God?
So for me personally, like, I'm a big liturgy fan. I love like liturgical worship. Like, if I could have liturgy every single day of the week, I would do. When I was younger, that was not the case. Like, I was one of those girls who used to, like, she'd sit next to her mum and then and try to like edge away from the bench and then go, I need to go to the bathroom. The girls who sit in the bathroom, I was one of those girls.
Me too. I was one of those guys.
Yeah, right. Okay, so yeah, especially again, as a girl, especially in our church, like, you feel already very detached and very like whatever, not part of the story or anything. Maybe I'm folding the lefaif and pouring the water. That might be it. But it wasn't until I understood what worship meant for me, and I started to read into it about Orthodox worship, and I started to like, and someone started to encourage me to use my gifts as well to get involved in prayer and worship, and all of that kind of combination pushed me to want to be in God's face as much as I could. So whether it was in liturgy, whether it's in a prayer meeting, whether we were singing hymns together in the park, whatever it was an opportunity for me to be in God's face. And at the same time, I felt I was being healed in all of those processes. Like, worship, as much like a lot of especially commentators and scholars always say, well, worship's all about God-centered. And yes, it's focused on God-centered, but as we've discussed, there is a union happening in that process. And as much as we're focusing on God, he is transforming me in the process. I'm being healed, I'm being sanctified. Like the words of the liturgy are constantly about, like, we have nothing, you have everything, come and take my nothing, make it something. And that is in a nutshell, like, everything is yours, you are worthy of everything, but I'm here because I'm nothing and I need you. And I found a lot of healing in liturgy, and I try to encourage a lot more people to find that healing there, and because we can't be healed outside of him. We can't, like, as much as we try, sorry doctors, like as much as we try to like put a plaster or so you guys say band-aid, a band-aid on something that's to cover up, in front of him he can see the open wound and he can get in. And that for me is worship, is to let him get in to my wounds and do some work. Yeah, that's for me personally.
You know, Rhonda, not to defend the medical profession or anything, but they even started to come around after a while and realize that there is a part of like human healing, even if you're totally secular and you don't believe in anything ever for any reason. There's an evidence base that says even if you allow yourself to be lost in meditation, when you're meditating about nothing, like just when your mind is still and you're in quiet time, like that's beneficial for your soul, and there's direct health benefits, right? And for us, I used to, similar to you when you're saying like I had a hard time like long O's and stuff when I was a kid, like a lot of vowels really confused me. But I realized even again, like medicine will look and say, no, the idea of kind of in that repetition and in that moment just being like present and being fully immersed in that worship experience, there's real physical healing even go on. Ways that we don't even fully grasp, like your immune system begins to improve and like all sorts of stuff that's like good for COVID and stuff is like actually better from like the science world, right? Things that the church has kind of been telling us of how we need this for our sanctity for a long time, but just to reaffirm what you're saying.
I remember in my exercise physiology class, I wrote a paper on the benefits of prayer to your cardiovascular system.
Amen.
There was like tons of evidence on it. So just to echo Mina's point, it's not like we're talking. It's somehow God has wired within us this need for us to connect to Him, for us to be whole and for us to be healed. And I love what you said about liturgy. Because liturgy is us bringing our brokenness to God and Him exchanging His life and His healing. And I think the reason why so many of us struggle with liturgical worship oftentimes is, first of all, we don't know what's going on, nor have we tried to invest in learning what's going on. And I think sometimes for us, we think that length means less, like means worse. Like if I just do these like quick short prayers, they're great. Like why do I need to go this long? But it's about being in the presence of God and being healed in the process. There's like this exchange that's happening. So I love what you said about liturgy, and I echo that people need to be encouraged to go and to find healing in it. And hopefully all our churches reopen soon, because I haven't been to a liturgy since February. Our churches are open, but they're limited, and I have new babies, and I have to be careful. But I mean, I'm in dire need of some Eucharistic, a Eucharistic meal and Eucharistic healing. So,
I think actually, I'm going to be honest. I think this pandemic has awakened the desire for people to return back to the liturgical life of the church. Like I've spoken to a few people, like they broke down the minute they went into the house of God. They broke down when they were partaking in the liturgy. Like they just couldn't contain. Like I couldn't contain myself. Like it just, like it's like if we believe that there's life in this way, like then wouldn't I want to run to it? Like I think. We have to really believe that this is a place of healing. Like this is the hospital, and I can't go anywhere but Him. I can't go anywhere but to the church. I can't. And then when I know that and know that He's not expecting much from me, then it makes it easier to walk in. Like I think, just as you said, like a lot of issues is what stops people is they feel guilt. They're not good enough. Maybe they're not the deacon that their other friend is, and or I don't know, like they're comparing themselves to so and so and so and so, but God is not looking at him or her to the left or right. I mean, He's looking at me, like He's looking at me, and He's going to come and fix me, and And yeah, and also like another thing is like, as much as when we worship him, like we're trying in our way to respond to what he's done for us. Like we're trying, it's a try, like, because nothing we will ever do or say can ever equate to what he's done for us. But I feel God is trying to tell us, like, when we come and worship me, I'm coming to adore you. Like God is adoring me in that process. Like I was reading up some verses in Deuteronomy, and one of the verses that says, it was Deuteronomy 30, 17 to 18. It says, but if your heart turns away so that you do not hear and are drawn away and worship other gods and serve them, I announce to you today that you shall surely perish. You shall not prolong your days in the land which you cross over the Jordan to go in and possess, that you may love the Lord your God, that you may obey his voice, and that you may cling to him, for he is your life and the length of your days. Like, God wants us to cling to him, not because he wants, as he said, like we do all this big song and dance for him, but because he's my life, and outside of him is death. Choose life, not death. Like that is, and so that worship is, I feel like, another way to say cling, like a clinging to him. But yeah.
And maybe to tie that to something that you said earlier. Sorry, I mean, we're gonna. You can address this too. I want to hear from you on this as well, because that something that Randa said earlier about the life of worship on Sunday, but then also kind of Saturday through Monday, like the rest of the week, right? And this idea that somehow, worship is not just relegated to Sunday morning, but there is kind of a sacramental experience in the whole week. What does that mean? What does that actually look like? Is it something that is practical, or is it something that's like, is it just a matter of saying a prayer as you clean the toilet? Like, what is this in practicality for us day to day? Is it praying as you Zoom? Like, what's the deal with it? How do we do it?
I think if we can learn and truly learn that prayer is not words, we can let our imagination grow wild. If we can just learn that concept, that prayer and worship does not always mean words, only when necessary. But other than that, it's you can just let your imagination go wild. And part of that, if we truly learn how to perceive the presence of God in one place, there's no way we can't see him everywhere else. Because if worship is about the exclamation of God's glory, then as I perceive it and as I see it, then I will be able to see everywhere else. The sunrise will no longer be just the sun and some light from the east. It's going to be the glory of God manifested in his creation. That's going to be prayer. Someone talking to me about something at work, and internally I am like empathizing and understanding to the depth of my heart what they're going through. That is prayer. If I'm someone who loves nature, being out in nature and hiking and truly mesmerized by God's beauty and reflecting back on God, that is prayer. So to take it back to what Randa is saying, if I can take liturgical prayer and liturgical service and understand how to find God in that Eucharistic mystery and truly find him, then I will be able to take that and kind of reflect on it every day in everything that I do. And then the interesting thing is that it's all different for different people, because I can't remember who, but one person one time referred to it as like, find your thin places. It's the place where earth and heaven, or the division between earth and heaven, is really thin. Like, you go and you find what works for you. For you, that might be good music. For someone else's nature. For someone else's like exercise. There are places where you find God outside of words that you can kind of also hone in on, so that you use words when you need, and when you're not, you also find that union and connection with God and other things that we do. So we all need to explore. It's like an exploration of, where is my thin place? Where is the place where I find God the most? Is it in service? Is it in being outdoors? Is it being, with my family? And capitalize on both, because prayer with words and prayer in action feed off of each other. So I think that's something that I also need to work on myself, but we can all learn how to do that.
Just one thing on that. that's kind of, if you think about it, Mina, in like what you're describing is this open exploration. What sometimes happens is like you're open and you're exploring and you're doing kind of all, some ideas. Someone says to you, nope, that's stupid. That's not the way you worship. This is the way you worship. You got to do it this way, right? And then sometimes people have this experience of getting like totally deflated, because what you're saying is so refreshing, right? And it's so like it's the spirit of God kind of being creative in us. But sometimes we have the experience of like, no, it's this way or bust. You know, and if you do it any other way, then you're being unchristian.
Yeah. I mean, what else is the role of the Holy Spirit, right? Like, that's why the Holy Spirit abides in each of us individually, so that it can work with us individually.
Yeah.
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 We're not robots.
Yeah. And I guess, what would you guys say to people that have never prayed? Like, I mean, I think it's easy for us, if we're talking to people that have prayed, to tell them how to come up with a prescriptive method to pray, or like find your sort of area, your thin spot, as Mina said. But what about for those who still feel like, man, like, first of all, what kind of God would want to hear from me? I'm like too sinful. I'm too broken. He doesn't know what I do in secret. What kind of God would even like care for me? And I've never prayed before. I don't know how.
Randa.
I mean, I would go and hug that person first, because maybe that's where they need to start to feel the embrace of God, is through the person who they're speaking to. And then that can be the start of prayer. Like, we're praying via this communion together. And the problem is a lot of people's perception is they've not felt any love, maybe from anyone. Maybe the church rejected them, maybe people at home rejected them. So obviously all of that default onto God, because, well, you are the creator of everything, and here's your church who are rejecting me, here's my family that are rejecting, like, everyone's rejecting me, so I assume you're doing the same thing too. So it needs a lot of grace, and it needs real patience with that person and meeting them where they're at, like, you know. And I especially tell a lot of like the youth in our church, like, just, if you want to scream, then scream. Like, if you want to shout at God, shout. Like, don't like, you don't need to say like the formal words, just say it out as it is. And you can just scream right now if you want, and I'm here to support you through that time. And we kind of have to let people just be, and we pray in that moment that God will come and reveal his sweetness to that person, and unpick all that hurt and whatever, you know, whatever it is that they've endured, to kind of start afresh. And it's I think it's baby steps. Like, we've got to go back to basics, as you said, and just be with them along the way and hold their hand in. I mean, I think that's how I would.
Yeah.
If we look at the Lord's Prayer, without going into detail, it's pretty much kind of divided into three main sections. One, where God says, like, I'm your protector, like, acknowledge that I can take care of you. And like the last section is the section about like acknowledge that you can't do this alone, pretty much, or understand that when we say forgive us our trespasses and like all that stuff, that's like that's like. And the section in the middle, the thy kingdom come, is about really God saying, like, I really can't wait to chill with you. That's just really what he's saying. And that's it. The part about give us our daily bread, which we focus 90% of our prayer on when we ask for things, if you break down the Lord's Prayer into 10 sentences, it's one sentence. It's 10% of the entire prayer. Everything else is about God saying, I got you. You can't do this by yourself. And I can't wait to chill. And it's not like one of your boys where he says, hey, man, it's been too long. Let's hang out. Oh, let's hang out. I'll give you a call. And nobody calls nobody. You know, this is a real, genuine call. Yeah. Sorry, man. I forgot to call you, man. I got busy.
And, you know, Mina, that give us your day our daily bread, that daily bread is the word ouseia, so give us more Jesus. Like, it's not about like give us more Eucharist, give us more of you. It's not like physical, give me more, like, because he says in the verse, right, like the chapter right before, do not pray about what you should, like what you need, your Father knows what you need. Like these things, the birds get fed. So it's you're 100% right about that. Like, he just wants to meet with us.
He can't wait to chill. And then like Saint Irenaeus, where he says like the glory of God is man fully alive. That's like saying your dad cannot be more proud than when he sees you alive and well and in him. That's true. That's when you talk about God being needy for worship, quote unquote. That's his glory. He says, my glory is seeing you come alive. So when Randa says, you want to scream, go ahead. You want to just like sit down and cry, go ahead. That's your prayer. And it will grow, it will transition. It just starts with anything.
Yeah, I think like even a lot of the Psalms, when David would probably have been screaming and then crying and jubilating and dancing, like he probably was on every level of the spectrum, like, yeah. But it was real and raw, and God said that this is a man after my own heart. So we can take the pretenses out and just be as raw as possible, and as you said, explore and start from there.
And if you're unfamiliar with David is someone who has made a lot of grave sins and a lot of grave mistakes. And God said about this man that he has a heart after his own heart. So there really is no bottom. Like bottom does not exist.
Yeah, I was thinking earlier about this idea of worship. Like one of our forms of worship is Tazbah, midnight praises, and I used to always be confused about this. Like, praise him, sun and moon and stars. Praise him, mountains, earth, sleet, hail. Like, how can all these things worship him? Like, these are things that are objects, or these are things in nature. And I read this really nice quote that was saying that when things live according to what they're supposed to do, they're worshiping. So when the sun shines, it worships God. When we shine, when we live according to our fullest potential, we worship God. And that's man fully alive. In Saint Irenaeus says, is when we live according to the fullest potential of what God has instilled in us using our gifts and talents. So, I mean, thank you guys for that encouragement about, for those who don't know how to pray or have never prayed. I think a hug is a good place to start,
It always works with me. Start with a hug.
COVID or no COVID, you got to go for the hug, man. That's the...
I don't know if it's a girl thing or a boy thing, I'm not sure, but I'll leave it.
A hug.
I'm a hugger too. 100%. Love the hug.
When you mentioned that around the woman, I mean, we sort of alluded to it, but it really struck me the fact that sometimes taking a step back with the person to really know that it's not always just about we get lost in the mechanics sometimes of like, no, this is how you'll pray, and you can pray this way, you can pray that way, you can be more free or do more things. But really taking a step and saying, wait a minute, if you're asking this question and if you've never prayed before, there's a context that you're living in. There's an experience that I got to be able to like meet you in, validate, and say like, it's real, what you've gone through and what you know to be true. And God is different from that, whatever that is. Right? I remember hearing a talk years ago of how God is not like your father. God is a father, but he's not like every father. Some fathers out there are different from how God is, right? And for me, as like a shrink, that's oftentimes what I'm doing is I'm like walking with someone, just kind of unlearning something they've seen, or kind of rolling back the clock a little bit. And maybe that's kind of bringing it all together. This is where we are reintroduction-wise, is that maybe to begin to pray, like suspend what you think you know about God. There is something that you think you know about him or his church, or what it means to pray, or what it means to have union with him. And there's a reality that's maybe a little bit different, and it comes from, like Randa led us to, like God's loving embrace for us in our brokenness, in our like unending stupidity. But he is somehow, like Mina said, allowed himself to need to be needed by us. Those are some closing thoughts. Closing thoughts from you guys to and what we talked about here so far.
I'm just going to reference the resources. Randa mentioned The Practice of the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence is a great book to check out.
Excellent.
Also, Beginning to Pray by Metropolitan Anthony Bloom is an excellent prayer book to kind of get an understanding of what God is like in prayer.
Also, another book I would suggest is like Becoming Orthodox. That was a really big book changer for liturgy for me. So if people are still unsure about liturgical worship, want to get involved in that, then Becoming Orthodox by Father Peter Gilchrist.
Legend.
Of blessed memory.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this was a fantastic conversation. You guys really encouraged me, and I hope for all of our listeners, you're never too far, because no matter how far you stray, no matter how far you've gone, he's right beside you. So in our worst of traumas, in our worst of circumstances, in our hurts and our pains, God is with us. And when people abandon you and people hurt you, God is right there beside you, with you in that pain, carrying you through that pain. And I would just encourage anyone who's struggling right now to come to the Lord in prayer, to listen to this conversation, to what our amazing people on this podcast have said, because I just think there's a lot of the Lord is waiting for you, and he's yearning to hear from you. And today's a good day to start. So if you've missed past episodes, we encourage you guys to check them out. Episodes 1 through 10 are live on Spotify and all podcast platforms. You can ask Alexa to play, the Reintroduction podcast, live on YouTube as well. Thank you guys.
Please subscribe if you haven't, so you can receive the latest, and also try to rate the podcast, because that's how we can reach more people.
Yes,
because it's so good. You gotta give it 10 out of 5.
Exactly. Thumbs up.
We got 18 5-star reviews on iTunes, guys. Another good shout out resource is for liturgical worship is the Meet and Right podcast by Father Nathaniel in Atlanta. It's a great podcast that is all about enhancing liturgical worship. So I definitely recommend that as a sister podcast. So thank you guys so much for this conversation. And we look forward to seeing all of our listeners on the next episodes. Have a great day, and God bless you guys.
Bye.